November 1941. The approaches to Moscow. The mercury plummeted to 45 below. That wasn't a metaphor. It was a death sentence. Inside the turret, darkness and metal. 45 millimeters of armor might stop a shell, but the steel itself had become a predator. It conducted the cold better than any wire. To touch it with a bare hand was to leave your skin behind. Not figuratively, literally. 4 men: the commander, the driver-mechanic, the loader, and the radio operator-gunner. 3 days of marching lay behind them. Their bodies no longer even ached. They had simply stopped sending signals. That was worse than pain. The commander, a senior lieutenant whose name the archives had long since forgotten, sat in the turret, peering through the sight. Outside lay the forest. Pines stood buried waist-deep in snow. The forest road snaked west before vanishing into a white haze. Somewhere out there, a Wehrmacht column was moving. When it would appear was anyone's guess. Maybe in an hour, maybe in 6. The order had come the night before. A gravelly voice over the radio, fragments of words splintering through the static. "Hold the road. Column will pass by dawn. Do not let them through." That was it. No specifics, no reinforcements. 1 tank, 1 forest road, 1 crew pushed to their absolute physical limit. An ambush isn't about heroics. It's about the weight. A long, grueling, mindless vigil in a frozen iron box where you can't stand, can't stretch, and can't make a sound. You can't even cough. In that brittle, freezing air, sound carries. It carries a long way. The loader, Private Semyon Kovalyov, 22, from the Tula region, sat by the gun breech, staring into the void. The shells in the rack weren't just cold anymore. They were ice. You couldn't touch them without mittens, but loading the breech with mittens on was clumsy and slow. Kovalyov chose speed. His fingers had gone numb 3 hours ago. He flexed his fingers, again and again. A mechanical motion. Not to get warm. Warmth was a fantasy now. He just needed to know they still worked. They moved. That was good. That was the only thing that mattered. The T-34 sat in a caponier dug the night before. They had reversed the machine into the pit so they wouldn't have to turn around if they needed to bug out. Cut pine branches draped the turret. From the air or the road, it looked like nothing more than a snowdrift by the shoulder. No movement. No smoke. Outside, it was 45 below. Inside, it was 27 below. That wasn't warm, but it was the margin keeping these men alive. The frost worked methodically. First the feet went, then the fingers. Then the face grew so numb that words turned into guttural grunts. Kovalyov's right cheek hadn't felt the cold for a long time. A bad sign. The commander glanced at him at one point and said curtly, "Rub it." Kovalyov rubbed it with his palm. After a few seconds, the skin began to burn. That was good. Burning skin meant living skin. The temperature in this sector dropped every day. Not gradually, but in sharp, jagged stabs. On the night of November 26th, the mercury at division headquarters hit a mark the meteorologists hadn't even included in their charts. German staff documents captured later would record this as extreme weather conditions not foreseen in operational planning. Soviet reports from the same day were more concise. Frost intensifying, frostbite casualties exceeding combat losses. This wasn't an accident. It was a systemic failure of enemy logistics. The commander didn't know those statistics. He knew only one thing. His men were at their breaking point. 3 days without real sleep. rations cut in half the day before yesterday. In the thermoses, the remains of half-frozen tea no longer provided warmth. They just filled the stomach with slush. "Commander," the driver mechanic said quietly, "keeping the engine at idle. Consumption is normal. Tanks are 3/4 full." "Copy that." A short exchange, not a single wasted word. The V2 diesel was running, quietly, steadily. 700 horsepower at idle isn't a roar. It's an almost imperceptible thrum. But that thrum was life. As long as the engine ran, the oil wouldn't freeze. As long as the oil didn't freeze, the machine was combat ready. As long as the machine was combat ready, 4 men had a chance to see the morning. Killing the engine at 30 below is a death warrant. Within hours, the oil turns into a sludge that no pump can move. The starter won't turn the crankshaft. The machine becomes a stationary 26-ton coffin. That could not be allowed to happen. The commander pressed his face to the sight again. The road was empty. The forest was silent. Only the wind drove the ground drift between the trees, low and creeping, like phantom smoke. Somewhere over the horizon was Moscow. 70 kilometers. That's a number that doesn't compute when you're sitting in a frozen turret staring at an empty road. 70 kilometers isn't the front anymore. That's the capital. Kovalyov flexed his fingers again, checked again, confirmed again. They move. The forest remained silent. The column hadn't arrived yet, but it would come. The commander knew it for a fact. The Germans had been pushing toward Moscow for months. They didn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. They'd come too far, spent too much. The column would come. And then the cold would cease to be the primary enemy. Then the work would begin. The diesel never stopped. That was the law. Not a regulation, not a manual. A law of survival, etched by the experience of the first winter into metal and bone. At 30 below, a gasoline engine dies in a few hours. The oil thickens, the carburetor fails, and the spark plugs frost over from the inside. German designers built their machines for a European climate. They didn't account for 45 below. Soviet engineers did. The V2 diesel was designed with a margin of safety that seemed excessive in peacetime. It ran on a mixture that didn't turn to gel in extreme cold. It allowed for long periods of idling without overheating or a critical drop in oil pressure. It was built for conditions that the Wehrmacht High Command called unsuitable for combat operations. The driver-mechanic, Grigory Karchenko, kept the RPMs steady. It was a job that required constant, agonizing attention. Too low, and the engine would start to hunt. The RPMs would drop, and the oil wouldn't circulate. Too high, and fuel consumption would spike, and more importantly, so would the noise. In the frost, the sound of a diesel traveled for miles. Karchenko found the sweet spot. He held it. He hadn't moved from it for 8 hours. "Karchenko," the commander said softly. "Go ahead. You holding the RPMs?" "Holding. Steady." "Oil pressure?" Karchenko glanced at the gauge. 4, in the green." "Copy." End of conversation. No more words needed. The thrum of the engine filled the entire space inside the machine. It didn't oppress. It became the background noise that distinguished a live tank from a dead one. As long as it was there, everything was fine. As long as it was there, 4 men had a heartbeat. Kovalyov had realized this in the first hours of the ambush. The diesel was running. That meant the oil was warm, which meant that on the command "forward," the machine would move, not stall. This wasn't an abstraction. It was a physical fact upon which everything depended. Heat from the engine rose through the bulkhead into the fighting compartment. Not much, just enough to keep the internal temperature between 15 and 18 below. Outside, it was 45 below. A 30-degree difference isn't comfort, but it was the difference that separated a functional state from third-degree frostbite. Kovalyov sat by the breach and felt the heat from the bulkhead reach his left shoulder. His right remained frozen. He shifted positions a few times, trying to even out his body temperature. It didn't help. Eventually, he accepted it as a given and stopped moving. Movement is the enemy of an ambush. Any extra movement is a metallic creak, a rustle of clothing, an accidental elbow against the ammo rack. In the frost, the acoustics change. Sounds travel further. German forward scouts, if they were ahead of the column, could pinpoint a noise source from hundreds of meters away. The commander knew it. The crew knew it. Silence became a discipline. Karchenko kept his foot on the accelerator with the precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. 8 hours. No rest. His back had locked up long ago. He didn't react to it. To react was to move. To move was to risk everything. It was dark inside the tank. A few instrument lights provided the bare minimum of illumination, just enough to see the gauges. The commander sat in the turret with the sight. It was a bit brighter there, colder and lonely. The turret was the draftiest place in the machine. The hatch fit tight, but it wasn't airtight. A draft came through the turret ring, thin and sharp as a blade. In 8 hours of waiting, the commander hadn't stepped away from the sight for more than 2 minutes. It was a rule he'd set for himself. The column could appear at any moment. If it appeared and no one saw it in time, the ambush was blown. If the ambush was blown, 4 men were dead, and the road was open. He looked through the sight and saw the forest road. Snow, trees, ground drift. The T-34 was a living organism. That wasn't a metaphor, it was an engineering fact. The diesel provided heat. The heat provided oil pressure. The oil pressure kept the system combat-ready. The machine breathed through its exhaust pipes, venting thin plumes of steam into the freezing air. The commander knew this was a risk. Steam is visible. He accepted it as an inevitability. The alternative, killing the engine, was worse. At 40 below without the engine running, the oil in the system would start to change consistency within the first hour. In 3 to 4 hours, it would reach a viscosity where the oil pump could no longer circulate it. Starting the diesel after that without preheating was practically impossible. A standard electric starter wouldn't turn the frozen crankshaft. There were other ways, but they took time. And there is no time in combat. Karchenko knew this in his hands. Not theory, his hands. He'd seen tanks stall at the wrong moment several times last winter. He'd seen what happened to them afterward. So he held the RPMs 8 hours, without moving. "Karchenko," Kovalyov said quietly. "You awake?" "Yeah." "How's the leg?" "Left one's numb. It's fine." "Wiggle your toes." A pause. "They're wiggling." "Good." This short conversation didn't break the discipline of silence. They spoke in low voices, almost without moving their lips, like men who had long ago learned to communicate in conditions where an extra sound costs a life. The tanks were 3/4 full. That was enough for several days of idling or a full-scale battle and march. The commander's calculation was simple. If the column didn't show up by the next morning, there was still enough fuel to fall back to their original positions and receive new orders. But the column had to show up. The Germans were pushing toward Moscow along several roads. This forest road was the shortest route through a specific patch of woods. Division HQ had flagged the column's movement 12 hours ago. Scouts had spotted them on the march. Too much time had passed since then. Either the column was stuck somewhere on the road due to mechanical issues, or it was already close. The commander knew what that meant. He pressed his face to the sight again. Road, snow, trees. The diesel hummed, steadily, reliably.
Without a hitch. Kochenko held the pedal. Kovalyov flexed his fingers.
The silence was so heavy, you could hear the metal of the turret creaking from the frost. Quiet, rare clicks, as if someone were cautiously tapping on the armor from the outside. That was normal. Steel contracts in the cold. The commander had heard that sound hundreds of times. He ignored it. He watched the road. And then, somewhere in the white distance of the forest, far off, almost imperceptible, a light flickered. The light vanished. The commander didn't move. He stared at the spot where the light had flickered. Forest, snow, darkness, nothing. He waited. A minute later, there it was again. A bit further left, fainter. Then it vanished again. Headlights. The Germans were moving with blackout lights, narrow slits in the masking covers that provided minimal light. But in the absolute darkness of a winter forest, even that was visible. "Kovalyov," the commander said, quietly, steadily. "I hear you. To the gun. Take it slow." Kovalyov was already moving.
Slowly, without unnecessary noise.
He knew his position by heart, every protrusion, every corner, every lever. In the dark, in mittens, with numb fingers, he still knew it by heart. That wasn't skill. It was muscle memory, hammered in by months of training. He stood by the breech, checked the rack. The first shell, armor-piercing, was already by the rammer at the breech. Kovalyov placed his hand on the handle. He froze. Outside, it was 45 below. The gear was holding. The tank-quilted jacket, black, cotton-padded, cross-stitched, wasn't a dress uniform. It was a survival tool. The quilted channels created air pockets between the layers of fabric. Still air is the best insulator available. The jacket held body temperature where, without it, a man would start losing it in 20 minutes in this kind of frost. Kovalyov wore it over his tunic and a sweater. 3 layers. Each layer another barrier between flesh and steel. But the steel still took its toll.
The feet. That was the weak point. The metal floor of the fighting compartment. Beneath it, the ammo crates. Beneath the crates, the whole floor. Outside, 45 below. The metal conducted the cold from the bottom up with such efficiency that boot soles would freeze to the floor in minutes. That's why they wore valenki. Thick, felt, densely packed. They weren't pretty. They saved feet from frostbite in conditions where a leather sole would turn into a block of wood in an hour. Kovalyov felt the cold from below, always. The valenki held it back. But after 8 hours of immobility, even the felt was starting to fail. He stepped in place, not much, just enough to stay quiet. He rolled his weight from heel to toe. That movement did one thing. It forced blood down to his feet. Temporarily, for a few minutes. Then he had to do it again. The helmet, leather with a fleece lining, fit snugly. Ears covered, back of the head covered. This mattered. A third of body heat is lost through the head. A closed helmet kept it inside. An exposed head at 45 below isn't just uncomfortable. It's a medical emergency within 20 minutes. The commander in the turret knew this better than anyone. The turret was the coldest spot in the machine. Heat from the diesel rose from below, but by the time it reached the turret ring, it had already dissipated. The commander sat highest of all, closest to the roof metal, furthest from the heat source. His helmet fit so tight that the lining left marks on his skin after several hours of wear. He hadn't taken it off, not once. Fine motor skills were the first to go. All four of them knew this. Fingers would start making mistakes. Not gross ones, not immediately noticeable. Just a bit slower, a bit less precise. A button feels larger than usual. No, it's the fingers becoming less sensitive. You have to feel for a switch longer. Kovalyov worked around this factor ahead of time.
Several times an hour, unobtrusively, without extra movement, he clenched and unclenched his fists inside his mittens. Not for warmth, for precision. So that when the command came to ram the shell, his hands would do it right. A shell weighs 6.5 kilograms. Dropping it into the breach incorrectly means a jam. Clearing a jam in combat means losing momentum. Losing momentum in an ambush means death. "Commander," the radio operator gunner said quietly, "I hear a rumble from the west." "I hear it." A pause. "Multiple vehicles." "Yeah." Silence again. No clarification needed. Everyone in the crew understood. They were coming. Kovalyov made one last check. He ran his palm over the breech of the gun. The metal was cold. Always cold. But the gun was functional. That was the only thing that mattered. He stamped his foot a few times, quietly, almost soundlessly, shifted his weight. The blood flowed down. 8 hours of waiting. That's a lot.
The human body isn't built for 8 hours of immobility at 18 below inside and 45 below outside. It resisted. It sent signals, louder and louder, more and more insistent. Kovalyov acknowledged them and ignored them. Not because he was a hero, because he understood. There was no alternative. You can't move. You can't make noise. There's nowhere to get warm. Just wait. Maintain fine motor skills. Make sure your fingers move. Karchenko, behind the bulkhead, showed almost no signs of life. The driver-mechanic sat in his compartment and held the pedal. He made one small movement. He adjusted his grip on the right side steering lever. His arm had gone numb. He changed his grip just enough to restore blood flow. Not a centimeter more than necessary. Professionalism isn't about bravery. It's about controlling your body in conditions where your body wants to do the opposite. The rumble intensified. It was steady at first, distant, almost imperceptible. Then a rhythm emerged. Several engines, not running in sync. The characteristic sound of a column on the march. Different RPMs, different gear shift points. The Germans were moving slowly, cautiously. They were feeling out the road. They knew the snow hid ruts and pits. They didn't know what the forest hid. The commander watched through the sight. The road remained empty. Lights, again, closer. 2 sources were now distinguishable. The lead vehicle, probably an armored personnel carrier or a light tank. The point element comes first. Behind it, the main column. Karchenko, quietly. Ready. Ready. One word. The driver took his foot off the idling pedal and moved it to the accelerator. His fingers rested on the steering levers. His body, which had sat in one position for 8 hours, suddenly became something else. Focused, coiled like a spring. Kovalyov put his hands on the shell. Contact. The metal was cold even through the mittens. "Kovalyov," the commander said. "First one, armor piercing." "Armor piercing, aye." The shell was in his hands. The weight was exact. His hands didn't shake. The column was coming toward them. The lead vehicle emerged from the forest. The commander saw it through the sight, first the silhouette, then the details. An APC, a half-track. The tarp was off,
In the back, infantry huddled together. The vehicle moved slowly, cautiously probing for the road under the snow. Then, behind it, the first tank. The commander recognized the silhouette immediately. PZ WWII, a medium tank, the backbone of the German panzer units outside Moscow. A turret with a short gun, a wide hull. Tracks, narrow, designed for European roads. The machine moved strangely, not confidently. It lurched, a bit left, a bit right, as if the driver couldn't hold a straight course. Then it slowed down even more. Then it stopped. The commander watched, waited. A tanker climbed out of the turret. He jumped into the snow. He walked around the machine. He leaned down toward the track. He straightened up. He made a hand gesture, sharp, irritated. The tank didn't move. Behind it, another machine, also a Piezer KPFW-3. It stopped too. Not because of the first one, on its own. People climbed out of that one too. They walked around the machine. They made gestures. The commander understood. Karchenko, quietly. Stay put. Watch. Watching? The German tanks were sitting on an open stretch of road. The engines on several vehicles weren't running. You could tell by the exhaust pipes. Where a diesel or a functional gasoline engine would puff out a cloud of steam in the frost, there was silence. The dead silence of a non-functional machine. Maybach. That was the problem. The German tanks of this series used the Maybach HL120TRM gasoline engine. Powerful, reliable in a European climate, well proven in production. But a carburetor means jets, float chambers, diffusers. At 35 to 40 below, the fuel changed viscosity. The jets clogged. The float chamber wouldn't hold its level. The engine would stall and wouldn't start again without being preheated. Preheating in the open air at 45 below is not a quick procedure. The commander watched as the German mechanics tried to start the engines. He saw them. They were lighting fires under the crankcases, burning rags, heating the oil from below with open flames. It took time, a lot of time, and even then it didn't always help. If the oil had already thickened to the consistency of tar, an open fire under the crankcase only warmed the bottom layer. One machine lurched. It started. Then it immediately stalled again. Kovalyov heard it through the armor, the faint, intermittent sound of a foreign engine. Coughing, uncertain. "What's happening?" he asked quietly. "They're stuck," the commander replied. "Trying to start. They can't." A pause. "How many vehicles do you see?" "Counting." The commander slowly panned the sight along the column. 4 tanks, 2 APCs, more vehicles behind. Can't see. The forest is blocking them. Kovalyov didn't answer. He held the shell. The column was paralyzed. That was the exact word, not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. Paralyzed. Physically. The frost had done what no weapon could have done in such a short time. It stopped a mechanized column on the road without a single shot fired. The narrow tracks of the German tanks were sinking into the snow. The European track width was designed for hard roads or moderate soil. Here, the snow was waist-deep off the road, and on the road itself, there was a hard crust over a loose layer. The heavy machine would break through the crust and bury itself. To get out, they needed full engine RPMs, but the engine wouldn't start. A vicious cycle. An engineering dead end. Soviet designers had thought about this back in the 30s. The T-34's wide track, 750 millimeters, gave it a ground pressure significantly lower than that of German machines of comparable weight. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculation for specific conditions. Russian winter, Russian mud, Russian snow. The engineers at the Kharkov plant designed the tank for this land. German engineers designed their machines for another. The commander looked away from the sight. He looked at Kovalyov. In the gloom of the fighting compartment, the loader's face was indistinguishable, but the commander knew the expression that was there now: focused, blank, ready, professional. Kovalyov. Yeah, they aren't going anywhere. I get it. We wait a bit longer. Let them all pull up. This was a calculation, not cruelty. If they opened fire on the lead vehicles now, the tail of the column would have time to retreat into the forest, disperse, and organize return fire. They had to wait until the entire column was out on the open stretch of road. Then, a kill zone. The lead vehicle burns, the tail vehicle burns, and the middle goes nowhere. Simple geometry, simple arithmetic. The Germans on the road were unaware they were being watched. They were preoccupied with their vehicles. One officer, the commander caught him in his sights, paced along the column, gesturing as he barked orders. Mechanics were wrenching away beneath the machines. Another tank tried to turn over. That hacking, coughing sound again, followed by silence. The infantry in the half-tracks stayed put. It made sense. At 45 below, stepping out of a vehicle without urgent cause meant losing body heat instantly. To put it bluntly, German winter gear in November 1941 was woefully inadequate. Wehrmacht High Command hadn't planned for a winter campaign of this intensity. The soldiers fought in greatcoats and side caps. In a greatcoat at minus 45, that wasn't just cold, it was a slow death. They sat in their vehicles and froze. The mechanics outside froze faster. Another vehicle from the rear of the column crawled into the clearing. It came to a halt. The trailing tank couldn't bypass the machine in front. The road was narrow, flanked by deep snow. Heading into the woods meant getting bogged down for good. The column had bottled itself up. "Commander," Kharchenko called from behind the bulkhead. "Another one stalled. I hear it. To the left of our position." "I see it. Hold." "Holding." The V2 diesel hummed steadily. The oil was warm. Pressure was normal. The machine was ready. Kovalyov adjusted his grip on the shell. Through his mittens, the metal felt slightly warmer than it actually was. His fingers had adapted, losing the ability to register the difference. He knew this. He gripped it tighter. On the road, the German officer stopped at the lead tank. He raised his head, looking toward the woods. The commander didn't move. The officer stared straight toward the revetment. 30 seconds passed. Then he turned away and walked back along the column. He saw nothing, only snow and trees. Another vehicle emerged into the open. It stopped beside the others. The commander counted. Slowly. Precisely. 6 vehicles in the open. Woods behind. Woods ahead. The road blocked by their own. There was no point in waiting any longer. "Kovalyov," the commander said. His voice was steady, quiet. "Ready. Ready. Kharchenko." Listening. "On my command, forward. 10 meters. Position at the tree line." "Copy." The commander pressed his cheek to the sight. The lead tank was broadside, its flank exposed. Distance, about 180 meters. This wasn't a shot. This was work. "Forward." Kharchenko floored the accelerator. The diesel roared, not gradually, but instantly. 700 horsepower, idling for 8 hours, delivered torque without delay. This was the difference between a Soviet diesel and a German carburetor in one brief moment. One roared on command, while the others sat dead on the road 180 meters away. Wide tracks bit into the snow. They didn't spin, they gripped and pulled. 26 tons of steel moved without a jerk. The revetment released the machine. 10 meters. The commander counted them by feel. Stop. Karchenko braked. The tree line. The timber still provided cover from the flanks. Ahead lay the open stretch of road and the column, which was only now beginning to react to the sound. Too late. The commander caught the side of the lead PZ KPFW-3 in his sights. The distance had closed to about 150 meters. The tank's side was exposed. The armor there was half as thick as the front. At this range, the F-34 armor-piercing shell worked without question. Fire! The gun recoiled. The sound inside the turret wasn't a bang, but a physical blow, sharp, hitting the chest and ears simultaneously. The breech slammed back, ejecting the spent casing. Kovalyov caught it automatically, not thinking, just catching and tossing it aside. His hands were already reaching for the next shell. On the road, the lead tank shuddered and began to smoke. It didn't explode. It simply caught fire. The shell had punched through the side and done its work within. A few seconds later, thick smoke poured from the hatches. Load! Ready! The commander was already tracking the next target, the tail vehicle. Close the exit. That was the first rule of a kill zone. The head burns, the tail burns, and the middle goes nowhere. Fire! Second shot. The rear half-track took a shell to the engine compartment. It lurched to a halt. Steam hissed from under the hood, followed by flames. The column was trapped. The Germans reacted. These weren't green recruits. They were experienced crews who had fought through France and half of Russia. Movement erupted from the vehicles with working engines. One tank tried to pivot. It veered off the road and immediately buried itself to the hubs of its road wheels. Infantry began to spill out of the half-tracks. The commander ignored the infantry. Infantry without armor in an open field at 45 below was no threat to a tank. The threat lay in the functional vehicles. Kovalyov, middle one, 3 o'clock. I see it. Fire! Third shot. The shell struck the turret of the middle PZ KPFW-3. A deflection. The armor held. The commander noted it without emotion. Deflection, bad angle. Load, same one. Ready. Fire! Fourth shot. This time, into the side. The tank stopped dead. Smoke rose from the turret ring. The work continued, methodically. No wasted movement. But right here, on the fourth shot, the problem the commander had anticipated, and for which there was no good solution, manifested. There was no radio in this tank. This was the reality of logistics in November 41. Command vehicles were equipped with radios first. Line tanks got them only if they were available. In this crew, they weren't. The bow gunner radio operator, the fourth crew member, sat in his seat and functioned solely as a hull machine gunner. The radio part of his job didn't exist in this fight. This meant no contact with neighboring positions, if there were any. No corrections from an outside observer. No warnings about threats from the flanks. The crew saw only what the commander saw through the sights, and the sights were starting to fail. The T-34's optics were a liability in freezing conditions. It wasn't a design flaw, but a law of physics. The sight lenses had different temperatures on the inside and outside. In the cold, moisture condensed on the glass. 4 shots, each producing powder gases, heat, and a pressure drop, had caused the glass to fog from the inside. The commander saw it. The image in the sights was losing clarity at the edges. The center still held, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Karchenko, he said. Right 3 meters. Slow. Copy. The tank rocked and shifted. The new position offered a slightly different angle. Less snow at the left track, firmer ground under the treads. The commander pressed his eye to the sights again. The image was worse. The boundary between clear and blurry had crept closer to the center. On the road there was chaos. 3 vehicles were burning. One was belly deep in the snow. German infantry scattered along the shoulder, diving into the drifts and opening fire with small arms. Bullets pinged against the armor. The commander heard them like hail on a tin roof. Useless. The armor held. One German tank managed to start its engine. The commander caught it in the blurring sights. The machine was turning, trying to present its frontal armor to the threat. A professional move. The PZ KPFW-3's frontal armor could withstand an F-34 shell at this range. Kovalyov, AP, the one turning. I see it. Fire on my command. Wait for the side. This was a moment for patience. Fire now, and the shell would hit the frontal armor, ricochet, and the machine would slip behind the hull of a burning tank. Wait, and it would finish the turn and expose its flank. The commander waited. The German machine turned slowly. The snow provided heavy resistance, the engine was barely warm, and it lacked power. The turret began to rotate toward the Soviet tank. The commander saw the German gunner searching for him through his own optics. They were hunting each other simultaneously. Fire! 5th shot. The shell struck the side of the German machine just as it had completed about a third of its turn. The side wasn't fully exposed yet, but the angle was sufficient. The machine stopped. The turret ceased its rotation. The sights were now completely fogged over. The commander saw only silhouettes, dark spots on a white background. Details were gone. He could distinguish the outlines of the vehicles and estimate the distance roughly, but the optics no longer provided a precise shot. This wasn't a catastrophe. It was a task. Kotchenko, kill the engine! Stopping! The commander pulled the hatch handle. The frost invaded the turret instantly.
Not gradually, but in one violent blow. The commander leaned out to his shoulders. The wind hit his face, not just cold, but cutting. At this temperature, exposed skin began to lose sensitivity in seconds. He didn't close the hatch. He looked. The road. There it was. 3 vehicles were burning, providing a flickering light. In that glow, everything was visible. German infantry in the snow along the shoulders, 2 surviving tanks, one bogged down, the other stationary, and another vehicle at the tail of the column trying to turn around. The commander assessed the situation in 5 seconds. Kovalyov, he shouted down. Tail, half-track, left of the burning one. I see the direction. Fire! 6th shot. Nearly blind based on the commander's voice designation. The shells screamed out. The commander saw the burst, slightly right of the target. A miss. Left 1.5! Fire! 7th shot. Hit. The commander dropped back into the turret and slammed the hatch. His face burned. The skin had taken its toll in those few seconds. Not frostbite, not yet, but the line was close. Kovalyov, he said, we're cleaning the optics. How? With our hands. Kovalyov climbed up, not because he wanted to, but because it was an order and there was no other way. The turret periscopes, viewing blocks of thick glass in metal frames, were coated in ice on the outside. Not frost, but dense, opaque ice, frozen over 8 hours of standing and reinforced by condensation from the powder gases. Through such glass, you could distinguish light and shadow, but nothing else. The commander held the hatch cracked, just enough to see the road and give commands. Kovalyov worked outside the turret, not climbing out completely, but clinging to the turret ring with one hand while scraping the periscope with the other. The frost hit him immediately. He had to remove his mittens. In mittens, you can't feel if you've reached the glass, you can't clear the ice from the frame, and you can't check if the field of view is clear. Bare hands on metal at 45 below? You had seconds, not minutes. A few seconds, and fingers would start to stick to the steel. Not much, but enough that pulling the hand away sharply meant leaving skin behind. Kovalyov worked fast. He used his fingernails where the ice was thin, and the heel of his hand where it was frozen thick. The glass began to open up. First one corner, then the second. On the road, they were shooting back. German infantry were firing at the tank's silhouette, haphazardly with small arms. Bullets pinged against the turret. Near Kovalyov's hand, there was the metallic crack of an impact. He didn't flinch. He kept scraping. This wasn't bravery. This was calculation. A rifle bullet wouldn't penetrate the turret. As long as he was out there working, the commander had a sight. Without a sight, the next shot went nowhere.
"Kovalyov, left periscope," the commander said from above.
On it. His hands burned, not from heat, but from pain. At this temperature, pain comes before numbness if you're moving. That was good. Pain meant blood flow. Numbness meant there was none. The left periscope was harder. The frame was frozen deeper. Ice was jammed in the gaps between the glass and the metal. Kovalyov pressed with the heel of his hand. The ice cracked, but not all of it came away. He switched back to his fingernails. A nail broke. He didn't stop. "Clear?" the commander asked. Kovalyov pressed his face to the side of the periscope, checking the angle. "Clear. Get down." Kovalyov slid back into the turret. Karchenko immediately handed him his mittens, silently, precisely. Kovalyov pulled them on. His hands were shaking with a slight tremor, not from fear, but from temperature shock. It would pass in a minute or two once the mittens began to trap his body heat. "Can you feel your fingers?" the commander asked, his eyes never leaving the sights. "Yeah, all of them." Good. The sights were working again. Not perfectly, the optics themselves still had a slight blur at the edges, but the center held. At a distance of 150 meters, it was enough. The commander looked at the road. The column was burning out, yet resisting. This was normal. A well-trained enemy doesn't lay down their arms just because the lead vehicle is burning. They regroup. They look for cover. They organize fire. The German tankers were doing exactly that. Those who had escaped the knocked-out vehicles took cover behind the hulls. Those in functional ones tried to maneuver. One Panzered Kapfei WWII, the same one that had started up earlier, managed to reverse about 20 meters and stop behind a burning half-track. Partial cover, frontal armor exposed. Smart, but not enough. "Karchenko," the commander said. "Left 5, smoothly." "Copy." The T-34 rocked. The wide tracks found a new foothold. Moving 5 meters to the left provided a different field of view and a different firing angle. Now the German tank behind cover was visible from a new perspective. Not the front, but a front-side angle. Not ideal, but better. "Kovalyov, a P, the one behind the burning one." "I see the direction." "Fire." 8th shot. The shell struck the corner of the hull. The commander saw the flash of the impact. The German tank didn't catch fire. The angle was steep, and part of the shell's energy was lost to a ricochet. But the machine stopped moving. Something inside had failed. The drivetrain, the engine, or the crew. It didn't matter. The main thing was that it was stationary. Kovalyov worked at the breech without pause. Casing aside, shell into the breech, handle, ready. No words, no wasted movement. His hands were still shaking from the cold, but muscle memory was stronger than the tremor. Then, with the fabric of his winter jacket, Kovalyov snagged the turret traverse lever. It was a fraction of a second.
The jacket caught. He felt the fabric tighten, stopping him from completing the movement to the rack. He jerked away. The jacket unhooked. But that jerk took time. An extra second and a half, maybe two. Nothing in a normal fight. Critical in an ambush, where every second is an opening for an enemy who isn't standing still. The commander noticed. "Kovalyov, I hear you. Got it. Won't happen again." This wasn't a reprimand. It was a notation. In the cramped space of the fighting compartment, winter clothing was a constant hazard. A quilted jacket, padded pants, thick mittens, it was all bulk. And bulk in a tank meant snags, delays, and the risk of getting stuck during an evacuation if the machine caught fire. Tankers knew this fear. It wasn't discussed aloud, but everyone who had seen a crew fail to escape a burning machine remembered it. A quiet, permanent background noise. The commander opened the hatch again. The wind lashed his face.
He held it open longer this time. He needed to assess the entire scene, which the sights gave only in snatches. The road was smoking in 3 places. German infantry were prone along the shoulder. Some had begun an organized retreat into the woods, covering each other. This was sensible. Infantry in an open field under tank fire is a non-viable position. 2 German tanks were still standing. One, with a stalled engine, wasn't firing. The second, the one that took a shell to the corner, was also silent. One half-track at the tail of the column was turning around, slowly, trying to escape back down the road. "Kovalyov! Half-track at the tail! It's bugging out!" "Direction?" "Straight ahead, the far one!" "Range?" 250! Fire!" 9th shot. The commander gave the target designation by voice. Hatch open, eyes on the target. The shell screamed out. A hit. In the rear section of the half-track. The machine stopped. Men began to scramble out of the back. The commander dropped down and slammed the hatch. His face burned worse than before.
He didn't touch the skin. He knew you couldn't rub it if you suspected frostbite. He just held it. "Commander," the bow gunner said quietly. "Left side. Movement in the woods." The commander pressed to the sights and traversed the turret left. Trees. Snow. Shadows. Something was moving. German infantry were flanking them, on foot, through the woods, waist-deep in snow. Slowly, but they were moving. Infantry wouldn't penetrate armor, but they might have anti-tank grenades. Or fire, the simplest and most terrifying way to stop a tank. A bucket of gasoline on the air intake grill required no special weapons. It only required getting close enough. "Karchenko," the commander said. "Get us moving. We're changing positions." "Direction?" "Right, toward the tree line. We'll hold the road from there." "Copy." The diesel revved. The machine moved. Wide tracks shoveled snow and gripped the frozen earth beneath. New position, new angle. The fight continued. The explosion came from below and to the right. It wasn't a direct hit, but a near miss. The German gun of one of the surviving tanks had finally found the range. The shell landed 2 meters from the right track. Dirt and snow slammed into the side. The machine rocked violently. The diesel stalled. It wasn't a penetration. The hydraulic shock of the blast wave had passed through the hull, the oil lines, and the fuel system. The engine took a sharp pressure drop and died. Just died, as if it had been switched off. The silence inside the machine was different now. Not the working, tense silence of the ambush, but a dead one. Without the diesel, the space inside lost something fundamental. It was as if a heart had stopped. "Engine's dead," Karchenko said. His voice was steady, no panic. "I see it," the commander replied. A pause, 1 second, no more.
Start it up. Pneumatics. Copy. This was the moment for which Soviet engineers had installed the pneumatic start system on the T-34.
2 cylinders of compressed air at 150 atmospheres stood in the engine compartment as a backup, for when the electric starter failed or when there was no time to wait. There was no time. Karchenko pulled the pneumatic start handle. Compressed air hammered into the engine cylinders, not smoothly, but with a sharp pressure that forced the crankshaft to turn regardless of oil viscosity, regardless of temperature, and regardless of the shock wave it had just endured. The diesel caught on the second try. First, a cough, uneven and intermittent, then a roar. A cloud of black smoke erupted from the exhaust pipes, thick, dense, and visible against the snow for hundreds of meters. Oil was pumping. Pressure was rising. "Pressure?" the commander asked. Karchenko checked the gauge. "Rising. 3.5. Climbing. Wait for 4. Waiting." These seconds were expensive. A stationary tank with a running engine is still a stationary target. Maneuvering before the oil pressure builds means destroying the engine in minutes. Bearings without proper lubrication burn out fast. And without an engine, it's just a steel box. The German tank on the road fired again. The shell hit the frontal armor. The commander felt the impact with his whole body, short, blunt, like a fist to the chest through the steel. 45 millimeters of frontal armor at this range held. The shell ricocheted off. The armor held. The crew did too. 4, Karchenko said. "Pressure's at 4. Forward, right, to the trees." The machine moved, not smoothly, but with a lurch. Karchenko gunned it hard to clear the exposed position. Wide tracks buried into the snow found the hard ground and pulled. The T-34 slipped behind the tree line. A German shell landed exactly where the machine had been standing a second ago. The commander exhaled, not from relief, but simply because he hadn't breathed normally for several seconds. It was physiology, not emotion. "Kovalyov," he said. "How are you?" "Working." "Shells?" 8 AP, 3 HE. "Good." 11 shells. It was enough to finish what they started. Karchenko kept the machine in motion, slowly, along the tree line, staying out of the open. This was a maneuver the German gunners didn't expect. The T-34 wasn't leaving. It was shifting, looking for a new angle. The trees provided partial cover, not enough to block a shot, but enough to break up their silhouette. The commander worked the sights. The optics were starting to fog again. The temperature cycle from firing and movement produced constant condensation. He saw the road through the gaps between the pines. The burning vehicles provided a flickering light. Against this background, the silhouettes of the surviving German machines were visible. One tank was standing, the one that had been firing. It had turned its front to the woods, toward the spot where the T-34 had been earlier. The gunner was searching for a target. He couldn't find it. Smoke from the burning vehicles provided interference, and the T-34's shift had knocked him off the aiming point. "Karchenko, stop! Here!" "Stopping." Position: a gap between 2 pines. Distance to the German tank: about 200 meters. Angle: almost a right side broadside. Not ideal, but workable. "Kovalyov, AP, the one firing. Side. Ready. Fire!" 10th shot. The shell passed between the trees and struck the side of the German tank. This time, it was a clean hit. The machine lurched. Smoke poured from under the turret. Not steam, but real smoke. Engine or ammo rack. The tank went silent. "Kovalyov, status." "Hands are holding. 7 shells left." 7 shells and 1 German tank still operational. the one sitting in the snow up to its hubs. It couldn't maneuver, but its gun was working. The commander saw the turret slowly rotating, feeling for an angle. An immobilized machine with a functional gun is not helpless.
It can hold a sector and wait for its moment. If the T-34 entered its direct line of sight, it would fire. The V2 diesel hummed steadily. Oil pressure, 4. Temperature, normal. The machine had survived a near miss, a brief engine stall, and 2 direct hits to the armor. It was working. This was exactly what it was made for. In 1939, Soviet engineers had built a margin of error into the T-34 that seemed excessive in peacetime. A diesel engine instead of a fire-prone carburetor, wide tracks for the Russian soil, a pneumatic start for the Russian winter. Each of these decisions was an answer to a specific question, and in this fight, in these woods, at 45 below, every answer turned out to be right. "Karchenko," the commander said. "Left, slow, along the trees." "Copy." The tank swung left, smoothly, without a jolt. The German tank in the snow traversed its turret to follow. The commander watched the movement through his sight. The turret moved sluggishly. The frost was seizing the turret ring, and the traverse mechanism was straining under the load. The T-34 moved faster. "Stop! Fire! Flank! Now!" The 11th round. The shell slammed into the side of the immobilized tank. A penetration. The machine was finished. The turret froze mid-traverse, locked in place, and moved no more. Silence fell over the road. 5 vehicles were ablaze. 2 sat derelict. No fire, but no signs of life either. The armored personnel carrier at the rear was the same. The German infantry had retreated into the woods, those who had made it in time. Several men lay in the snow along the shoulder. They weren't moving. The commander stared through the sight for another 30 seconds. 40. A minute. Nothing moved. "Karchenko," he finally said. "Halt." "Halt, aye." The diesel settled into an idle. The oil pressure held steady. Outside, the vehicles were still burning. Their light fell across the snow in jagged orange patches. Kovalyov lowered his hands from the breech. For the first time in the entire fight, he just let them drop. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer exertion. He raised his right hand and looked at it in the gloom of the fighting compartment. His fingers moved. All of them. The commander waited another 2 minutes. It wasn't out of caution. It was professionalism. A battle is considered over when you've made sure it's over. Not when the shooting stops. Not when the last vehicle grinds to a halt. It's over when you've checked every sector and received nothing but silence in return. He slowly panned the sight across the road, left to right, then back again. Burning wrecks, motionless silhouettes, snow illuminated by orange light. No movement. "Karchenko, dead slow. Move onto the road." "Roger." The T-34 emerged from behind the trees. The wide tracks found the roadbed beneath the snow and bit in confidently. No slipping, no fishtailing. The tank moved alongside what, only minutes ago, had been a German column. The commander watched through the sight. He didn't fire. He just watched. The first vehicle, a Payzer Kaupte FW3, was burning at the head of the column. Fire spewed from every hatch. The explosion had shifted the turret off its ring. The ammo rack had cooked off inside. There was nothing left of the crew. Not because they had managed to get out, just nothing. The commander didn't stop. He drove past. The second vehicle, an APC, sat across the road. Its side was torn open. Several figures in gray greatcoats hung from the troop compartment. The commander saw them through the sight. He moved the sight further. This wasn't cruelty. This was the job. A man who paused to dwell on every detail in combat stopped doing the work and started thinking about it. That killed you. Not instantly, but it killed you eventually. The commander did the work.
Karchenko, half speed. Right flank, bypass. Where to exactly?
That tank over there, in the snow. Check it. The German tank, bogged down in a snowdrift since the start of the engagement, sat to the right of the road. Its tracks were buried up to the road wheels. The engine was dead. The exhaust pipes were silent. The turret was turned at an angle. The gunner had tried to return fire until the very end. The T-34 pulled up within 30 meters. It stopped. The commander opened the hatch. The frost hit his face, familiar now, like a slap you expect. He inspected the vehicle. Hatches closed. No smoke or steam coming from the hull. The armor was pierced on the left side. The entry hole was clearly visible. The crew hadn't come out, which meant they never would. The commander closed the hatch.
Karchenko, back to the road.
This was tactical dominance in its most precise sense. Not a triumphal march, not a show of force. A methodical verification of the work's result.
Every vehicle was a question, either closed or open. Open questions were dangerous, closed ones were not.
By this point, all questions were closed. The T-34 moved along the column from head to tail. 500 meters. Slowly. The commander counted. 7 units of equipment. 5 were burned out or burning. 2 sat with punctured armor. No signs of life inside. The armored personnel carriers didn't count. Light armor died fast. The German infantry had gone into the woods. How many were there? The commander didn't know. It didn't worry him. Infantry in the woods at -45 without vehicles, without heat, without the ability to light a fire. That was no longer a military objective. That was a task for the frost. The cold would settle it on its own. All stop! Karchenko brought the tank to a halt. The diesel hummed at an idle. Oil pressure at 4. Fuel, half tanks. Enough. The commander opened the hatch and climbed out onto the armor. For the first time in 9 hours, he was standing outside the machine. The armor under his feet was cold, even through his felt boots. The metal, heated by the engine from below, remained freezing on top. The turret, the hatch cover, the handrails, everything was frozen through. He stood and looked at the road. 5 vehicles were burning. Smoke rose vertically. In the freezing air, there was no wind. Orange light spilled onto the snow. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of burning metal and the occasional pop when the fire reached ammunition in the enemy wrecks. Outside, it was -45. The commander stood on the armor, looking at the road, and felt one single fact. They had survived. Not because of luck, because the diesel had started from the pneumatic system, because the wide tracks found purchase where the narrow ones had bogged down, because 45 millimeters of armor held what it was supposed to hold, because the loader worked with numb hands and hadn't dropped a single shell. It wasn't luck.
It was the sum of decisions.
Engineering, tactical, physical.
Commander! Kovalyev called from below, through the hatch.
Movement! By the tail vehicle! The commander turned around. By the APC at the tail of the column, the one that had tried to escape and caught a shell in the rear, a man was walking away from the road toward the forest. Slowly, unsteadily. A greatcoat, a side cap. Alone. The commander watched. The man was heading for the woods. He moved heavily, either wounded or already frozen to the point of losing coordination.
He had about 60 meters to go to reach the tree line. The commander climbed down from the armor. He sat in his seat and closed the hatch. "Karkenko, hold position." "Roger." He pressed his face to the sight. He looked at the man in the greatcoat. Then he traversed the sight back to the road. Then he lowered it. "Kovalyov, vehicle status." "Gun is operational. 6 rounds left. Cleared the brass." "Karkenko, running gear." "Right track. Needs a check."
After that blast, I can't feel the tension. Understood. This was the next task. While the German wrecks burned and the frost worked on those who had fled into the woods, the crew had time to check the running gear. A loosened track could throw during a sharp maneuver. A thrown track meant an immobilized tank. An immobilized tank in this situation wasn't a death sentence, but it was a very bad fact. "We're going out to check," the commander said. "Both of us?" "Me and Karkenko. Kovalyov stays. Man the gun." "Aye." The commander and Karkenko climbed out through the hatches. Outside, the frost accepted them without warning. Karkenko crouched by the right track. The commander stood nearby, watching the woods, covering him. Karkenko worked quickly. He found the loose track link in the 3rd minute. The idler tension needed tightening, with a special wrench kept in the tool chest on the rear deck. Karkenko went back to the rear and opened the chest. He pulled out the wrench. Hands worked worse in the cold than they did inside. The wrench slipped once. Karkenko caught it before it hit the snow. He tightened the idler, checked the tension with his palm. Again. "It's holding," he said. "Good. Get inside." They returned to the tank. They had been outside for 8 minutes. It was enough for both of them to lose sensation in their fingers again. The commander clenched and unclenched his hands inside his mittens, not taking them off. The blood returned slowly. The road burned. The frost worked in the woods. The machine was operational. The commander took his map case, stiff from the cold, the corners brittle. He found the point on the map and marked it. They had carried out the order. The column had not passed. The road was closed. All that remained was to wait for morning. The vehicles were burning out. The commander gave the crew 10 minutes, not for rest, for a pause. There was a fundamental difference. Rest is when you can relax. A pause is when you need to restore operational status before the next task. The next task was already clear. Survive the night and keep the tank combat ready until dawn. This proved to be no easier than the battle. "Going out," the commander said. "All 4 of us. Full vehicle inspection. We work in shifts, 2 outside, 2 warming up inside. Swap every 5 minutes. No one objected. No one asked why. Everyone understood. Kovalyov climbed out first, through the turret hatch as his position was closest. He jumped into the snow. It took him up to his knees, off the road where there was no crust. He scrambled onto the road and stood by the side of the tank. The frost hit immediately. It didn't build up, it struck. The difference between -18 inside and -45 outside wasn't a gradual transition. It was a physical boundary that the body crossed instantly. The radio operator gunner followed. They split up to the sides. Checking the tracks was the first priority. Karkenko had already checked the right one, but after the firing and maneuvering, it needed another look. Kovalyov crouched by the left track. He ran his mittened hand along the treads. He searched for cracks in the track pins and checked the cotter pins. Under heavy impact, track pins could develop micro-cracks, not critical on their own, but during the next sharp maneuver, such a link could snap. The left track held. Kovalyov went the entire length, 23 links on the left side, each checked by touch. "Left side's clean," he shouted. "Right side's holding," Karkenko answered from inside. I already looked. Good. 5 minutes outside went by fast. The commander called Kovalyov and the radio operator back inside. He climbed out himself with Karchenko. Inspecting the running gear from below meant lying in the snow under the belly. Karchenko went down first. The commander held the flashlight.
The belly was fine. A near miss had dented the rear plate, but there was no breach. The road wheel treads showed no damage. Torsion bars, he couldn't see them, but the suspension had been riding level, so they were intact. Karchenko crawled out from under the tank. Snow clung to the back of his padded jacket. He stood up and brushed himself off. The belly's holding. Understood. Get in. They returned. Kovalyov and the radio operator went out again, this time to check the pneumatic start cylinders. After using the system, the pressure in the tanks had dropped. They needed to know exactly how much was left, because next time the diesel might stall again. The radio operator opened the access hatch for the cylinders on the rear. He looked at the gauge and shouted toward the commander's hatch. 1 tank, 1/3 pressure. The second, half. Enough for 2 starts, the commander said from the turret. Close it up. 2 starts. Not much. But for one night, enough, provided the diesel didn't stall again. And to keep the diesel from stalling, you couldn't shut it down. Again, the same law. The engine runs all night. Fuel consumption at idle was roughly 20 liters an hour. Over the night, 8 hours, 160 liters. About half the capacity remained in the tanks. That was plenty. The commander did the math automatically, while Kovalyov and the radio operator were coming back inside. It wasn't arithmetic. It was a survival reflex. Fuel, pressure, temperature, ammunition. These 4 numbers the commander kept in his head constantly, updating them every half hour. Everyone inside, he said. Listen to the order. We spend the night here. Don't kill the engine. Watch shifts. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. First shift, me and Karchenko. Kovalyov, radio op. Sleep. Sleep on what? Kovalyov asked, without irony. Just a question. On the ammo racks, like usual. Like usual meant curled up by the ammunition stowage, putting whatever you could find under your head, covered by one padded jacket over another. Not comfortable. But a few hours in a motionless horizontal position gave the body more recovery than sitting at a combat station, even if it wasn't full sleep. Kovalyov settled in by the breach. He pulled up his legs and closed his eyes. In 3 minutes, he was asleep. Not deeply, shallowly, on the edge between sleep and wakefulness. The body knew how to do this, to partially shut down while retaining the ability to react to a sharp sound or a command. This came naturally after a few weeks at the front. The radio operator fell asleep faster. The commander sat in the turret and looked through the sight. The road ahead was lit by the dying vehicles. The fire was already subsiding. There was nothing left to consume, and metal burns poorly. In an hour or so, everything would go dark, and the road would vanish into total blackness. Karchenko kept the engine at an idle. Quiet. Steady. Karchenko, the commander said in a low voice. Listening? How are your hands? The right one's worse. It got nipped a bit under the tank, but they move. Rub them periodically. I am. They were silent. Commander, Karchenko said after a few minutes. Yeah? We got them all. How many vehicles were there? 7. 7. A pause. Is that good? The commander didn't answer immediately. He thought about it. It's an order carried out, he finally said. Karchenko didn't ask anything else. At 2 in the morning, the commander woke Kovalyov.
Kovalyov sat up and shook his head. He ran his hands over his face, slowly checking the skin. Everything was fine. Your shift. Observation through the sight. If there's movement, wake me. Understood. The commander lowered himself into Kovalyov's spot by the breach and closed his eyes. Before slipping into a shallow sleep, he remembered one thing. The batteries. Kovalyov, he said without opening his eyes. Yeah? The batteries. A pause. Got it, Kovalyov said. This was a separate ritual of a winter bivouac, known to every tanker who had survived the first winter. T-34 batteries lost capacity critically fast in severe frost. At -45, a lead-acid battery left overnight in an unheated compartment could lose up to 80% of its charge. A starter wouldn't turn the crankshaft with a battery like that. The solution was barbaric, and the only thing that worked. The batteries were removed from their mounts and laid down with the crew inside the fighting compartment, right next to their bodies. Human body heat, 98.6 degrees, warmed the batteries all night. In the morning, the batteries were put back. They held their charge. This wasn't a metaphor or poetry. This was physics and survival. Kovalyov reached for the battery compartment. Heavy, awkward, covered in condensation, he pulled the batteries out one by one and laid them next to himself. He lay down, pressing them against him through his padded jacket. Cold metal through fabric. Unpleasant. Kovalyov didn't move. Outside, the last German vehicle burned out. The diesel hummed. The frost worked in the woods. The commander slept. Dawn came without announcement. The darkness simply became slightly less dark. Then grey, then white, even, flat, without shadows. A winter morning near Moscow offered no colors. It gave only light, enough to see. The commander opened his eyes before Kovalyov could wake him. 4 hours of shallow sleep by the breach. That was the maximum the situation allowed. The body hadn't rested. It had simply stopped spending resources faster than it could accumulate them. He sat up and listened. The diesel hummed. Steady. Oil pressure, 4. The idle had held all night without a single hiccup. Report, he said to Kovalyov. Quiet. No movement. The fires went out about 3 hours ago. Good. Wake everyone up. The crew got up without a word. Karchenko stretched, as much as the driver's space allowed, which was to say, almost not at all. The radio operator sat up, blinked a few times, and ran a palm over his face. Kovalyov's first task was the batteries. He put them back in the compartment, connected the terminals, and checked the contact. Batteries are warm, he said. They're holding. Good. The commander pulled the hatch handle. He opened it, and the frost entered the turret. Familiar now, like a morning report. He leaned out. The dawn light lay across the road, flat and merciless. 7 German vehicles. 5 burned out. Only skeletons remained, black, twisted, covered in frost right over the soot. The frost had worked all night, and now the scorched metal was covered in a thin layer of white, as if winter were trying to clean up after itself. It hadn't. The outlines of the vehicles were clear. There was a turret, there was a hull, there was what used to be a track. The 2 tanks that had sat without fire, they had changed overnight. The frost had reached inside through the punctures in the armor. Whatever was inside had become part of the winter. The commander looked at them without unnecessary thoughts, closed questions. Along the shoulder were several figures in gray greatcoats, motionless. They hadn't moved since evening. The frost had settled that question overnight. The commander had told himself that, in the evening,
and he had been right. He returned to the turret and closed the hatch. "The picture outside is clear," he said. "The column is completely destroyed. No survivors on the road. In the woods, we don't know. We pull back to our lines as soon as we get confirmation from HQ. For now, we wait." "The radio's silent," the radio operator said. "I know. Try every half hour." The radio was silent not because it was broken. It was silent because HQ worked on different frequencies during the night, and because the crackle of atmospheric discharge in severe frost created interference that shortwave signals struggled to penetrate. This was a known fact of winter communications. Wait. While they waited, they worked. The commander climbed out first. He stood on the armor, then jumped onto the road. The snow under his feet was packed. Here, where the tracks had passed, it held firm. The commander walked around the entire tank. He looked at every element without haste. 2 dents in the frontal plate, marks from direct hits that the armor had held. The metal wasn't pierced, but the dents were deep, 5 or 6 centimeters. He felt the edges. No cracks. The armor had worked as it should. Right side, the mark of a near miss. A small gouge in the armor plate, a few scratches from shrapnel. Non-critical. Running gear, tracks intact, road wheels without visible damage. Karchenko was right. The right track held after the tightening. The commander returned to the turret. He inspected the gun. The muzzle was clear. No bulging in the barrel. 11 shots during the fight. The gun had held without a single failure. He tapped the barrel. Just tapped it. Hand in a mitten. The metal was cold. This wasn't sentimentality. This was a check. For sound. For vibration. Everything was in order. "Karchenko!" he shouted. "Get out! We're lighting a fire under the hull." This was the next necessity. The engine had run all night, and the oil remained warm in the system, but the transmission and final drives had cooled to the ambient temperature overnight. Before the march, they had to be warmed up. Otherwise, at the first sharp maneuver or load, the cold lubricant in the gearbox wouldn't cope, the gears would run dry, and after a few kilometers, the transmission would fail. The warming was done simply. Rags soaked in spare oil. They lit them under the belly, not under the fuel tanks or the ammo racks, strictly under the transmission compartment. They let it burn under control, watching it. Karchenko climbed out. He pulled rags from the tool chest, doused them from an oil can, and lay down in the snow. He crawled under the rear of the tank. The commander stood nearby, watching. The fire caught instantly. The oil burned well. A yellow, smoky flame licked the belly from below. Karchenko controlled it, didn't let it flare up too much, nudged the rags aside if the fire strayed from the right spot. 20 minutes. That's how long it took for the belly metal over the transmission to warm to operating temperature. The commander stood and looked at the road. 70 kilometers to Moscow. That distance hadn't changed. They hadn't advanced toward the capital. They stood here, in this forest, by this road. But the 7 German vehicles that were heading for Moscow, they hadn't made it. That was the result. Not a breakthrough, not an offensive. One closed corridor for one night. The war was made of nights like these. Karchenko crawled out from under the tank. The snow on his padded jacket had melted from the heat of the fire. His back was wet. "Warmed up," he said. "Good. Get in." The radio came to life at 8 in the morning. Through the static, HQ call signs. The radio operator caught the wave, answered, transmitted the coordinates, and reported the result. A pause on the other end. Then, a short reply. "What are they saying?" the commander asked. "Acknowledged," the radio operator said. "Wait for relief. Move out on signal." "Time?" "They didn't say." "Wait. Wait again." But now it was a different kind of waiting. Not before the fight, but after. The body knew the difference. Kovalyov sat by the breach and looked at his hands, without mittens. He just looked. The fingers, all 10, moved normally. The skin on 2 fingers of his right hand, where he had scraped ice off the vision block without mittens, had a strange tint. Not white, not black, a reddish blue. It was the first sign of superficial frostbite. The commander noticed. "Kovalyov, show me your hand." Kovalyov held it out. The commander inspected the 2 fingers. He pressed down. Kovalyov winced, which meant there was sensation, which meant it was superficial, not deep. "Rub it with a dry cloth. Slowly, not with snow." "I know." "Then do it." This was the tally of 9 hours of work at -45. 2 fingers with superficial frostbite. It was a good tally. It could have been worse, much worse. They had survived because the diesel held the heat, because the padded jackets held the body, because the felt boots held the feet, because the helmets held the heads, because the wide tracks found the ground where the German ones had buried themselves, because the pneumatics turned the crankshaft when seconds mattered, because the calculation proved accurate. The T-34 sat on the road among what remained of the German column. The diesel hummed, steady, without faltering. The 4 men inside were silent. Each thought his own thoughts, and no one spoke them aloud. At 10 in the morning, the signal came. "Moving out," the commander said. Karchenko brought up the revs. The wide tracks bit into the snow and found something solid. The machine moved. Past the skeletons, past what was left of 7 vehicles and those who had been in them, past the tracks in the snow by the shoulder, past the silence that this battle had left behind. The T-34 headed east, toward their own, toward the next order. The road fell away behind the stern. The forest closed in. The white haze accepted the tank and hid it. The war continued. There were still 3 years, 540 days, and so many nights like this left until its end that no one was counting. But they had made it through this night.